Mom abandoned me when Dad died and left me his house. She reached out to make things right, but that was before I overheard her telling her husband that she was only doing this for my grandparents' money. I was 17 years old, just a few months away from turning 18, when my life changed in the most painful and sudden way imaginable. My dad passed away from cardiac arrest. One moment he was with us, full of life, and the next he was gone. It's still hard to wrap my head around how quickly everything shifted. There were no warnings, no gradual build-up to say our goodbyes or prepare ourselves emotionally. Just like that, my dad, the person who meant the most to me, was ripped from my life. We shared an incredibly close bond. He was the one I turned to for advice, comfort, and laughter, so losing him felt like losing a part of my soul. After my dad's funeral, when we were still in the haze of grief, his lawyer gathered the family together to announce his will. My dad was not a wealthy man, but he had always worked hard and made the right investments. The lawyer's announcement shocked everyone. My dad had left nearly everything to me. The family home, which had belonged to him, was now in my name. At first, I didn't fully grasp the weight of what that meant, especially while dealing with the grief of losing him. But as I was still processing it, my mom became absolutely furious. The moment she heard that the house was legally mine, she started yelling and demanding that the lawyer show her the will for verification. For context, my parents had one of the worst marriages in history. There was constant tension between them, and neither was entirely to blame. Both had their flaws. They had originally married out of love, or at least that's how they described it, but whatever love there once was had quickly faded. Their differences grew, and their love was replaced by resentment and frustration. Both of my parents were very career-oriented, and while you might think that would have given them something in common, it actually drove them further apart. My mom couldn't stand my dad's success. This was partly because, when she chose to have me, she had to put her career on hold for several years. To be clear, my dad never forced her. My mom has told me many times that she was unsure about becoming a parent, but eventually decided to get pregnant because she didn't want to regret not having kids later in life. However, once she had me, she realized quickly just how much she hated it. Not every adult should be allowed to become a parent, and my mom is a classic example of that. I can still vividly remember moments when she would snap at me for the smallest things, whether it was not tying my shoes correctly or struggling with my homework. She made me feel like a burden from the very start. As a child, I could sense her disdain, even if I couldn't fully understand it. I would see other kids with their moms getting hugs, encouragement, and warmth, but all I got from her was criticism and coldness. My mom's frustration with her own life spilled over into how she treated me, and it was impossible not to feel like I was in the way. After she gave birth to me, my mom had to take several years off from her career due to pregnancy complications and health issues. She hated the fact that she couldn't work and pretty much blamed me for it. During this time, my dad was the one supporting the family, and he thought this would be the perfect opportunity for my mom to bond with me. But that never happened. Instead of using this time to build a connection with me, my mom stayed emotionally distant. She would often tell me and my dad how she wasn't built to be a mother and how she wished I was never born. As a result, my dad and she would have several fights where he threatened to divorce her. Instead of seeing a psychiatrist, my mom would threaten to take me away from him just to punish him for leaving her. Clearly, my mom resented how things had turned out, both in her marriage and in motherhood. She often distracted herself by watching TV for hours or going out with her friends, leaving me alone without care or attention. She didn't even bother to hire a babysitter most of the time. I was left to fend for myself. The few times she was around, she made it clear she wanted nothing to do with traditional motherly responsibilities. She hated cooking, and I can't remember her ever making me a proper meal. My diet mostly consisted of frozen foods, mac and cheese, and pizza rolls, anything that didn't require effort. For a long time, that's all I knew. At the time, I didn't mind because I was too young to know any better, but now I realize just how neglected I was. It wasn't just about the lack of homemade meals or the absence of a warm hug. It was the emotional abandonment that hurt the most. Very quickly, I learned not to complain about anything to my mom. Anytime I tried to express my feelings or needs, it would backfire. Instead of taking any responsibility or trying to fix things, she would just scold me and make me feel like it was all my fault. It became easier to keep my feelings to myself and avoid triggering her anger. I was walking on eggshells constantly, trying not to upset her, trying to make myself invisible. That was the reality I lived with, and it left deep scars. In contrast, my dad made me feel seen and valued. I wouldn't say he was the perfect parent. He had his flaws too, but he was definitely the better of the two. Unlike my mom, he actually enjoyed spending time with me. I never got the sense that he was doing it out of obligation. He genuinely cared about being present in my life, and that made all the difference. As I started growing up, things changed in our household. My mom eventually went back to work, but never regained the prestigious position she had before taking time off. She hated starting from the bottom again, having to rebuild her career when she felt she had already paid her dues. In some ways, I could understand her frustration, losing years of career progress and feeling trapped by her circumstances, but that didn't make it any easier to be on the receiving end of her resentment. When my mom resumed working, I ended up spending a lot of time alone. After school, I'd come home, make myself a simple lunch, and finish my homework. It became routine, and honestly, I was used to fending for myself by that point. I had learned not to expect much from my mom in terms of emotional or physical care. But my dad still made an effort. On some nights, he would take me out to dinner, just the two of us. My mom never joined us. She kept herself distant, almost as if she were an outsider in her own family. During those dinners, my dad and I would talk about everything: his job, the interesting projects he was working on, office drama, or whatever was on my mind. For those couple of hours, everything felt normal. It was a rare moment where I didn't feel like a burden or an afterthought. I just felt like a daughter having a nice time with her dad. I really cherished those moments because they gave me a sense of security and connection. When I turned 14, my mom got a new job that required her to travel a lot. It was a high-paying position, and I think she saw it as her chance to reclaim some of the career success she had lost. She decided to accept the position without discussing it with my dad, which led to one of the biggest fights I had ever witnessed between them. My dad didn't oppose her working, but this job meant she would be gone for days at a time, and suddenly, he was left to take care of me entirely on his own. I remember hearing them argue late into the night, their voices echoing through the house. The main point of contention was me. I hated that. I hated knowing that I was the source of so many of their fights. Later, I went to my dad's study and told him that he didn't need to worry about me and that I could take care of myself when he was at work. I thought that if I could just prove I wasn't a burden, maybe things would be better between my parents. When I said that, I remember the look on his face. Guilt washed over him. He pulled me into a hug, as if he understood that I had been forced to grow up faster than I should have. It was one of those moments where we both acknowledged, without saying it outright, how dysfunctional things really were. Soon after, my mom officially started her new job and began disappearing for days at a time. When she was gone, the house felt quieter, almost peaceful. But when she came back, it wasn't any better. She rarely spoke to me, and when she did, it felt like talking to a stranger. There was no warmth, no connection. I would see her come home exhausted, barely glancing in my direction before disappearing into her room or out with her friends. Even though we were physically in the same space, she felt a million miles away. It hurt, but by that point, I had learned not to expect much from her. By the time I turned 16, my parents' marriage was practically non-existent. They were sleeping in different bedrooms, as if they were merely roommates. If you're wondering why they didn't just get a divorce and move on with their lives, believe me, I ask myself that question all the time. The truth is, I think they both avoided divorce because it was easier to stay together than face the consequences of separating. My mom had financial issues, and my dad didn't want to leave the house. Neither of them was willing to make the first move. And so, they coexisted in this strange limbo, both resentful but too stubborn to change things. My dad eventually died of cardiac arrest when I was 17. At first, it was hard to believe. Even after the funeral, I was still in shock, not really accepting that he was gone. It was only when the lawyer announced my dad's will and how the house was now mine that the full weight of it started to hit me. My mom couldn't hide her anger. The first thing she did when she heard was demand to see the will. The moment the lawyer left, she turned to me, her face twisted in fury. "You think you can just take everything from me?" she hissed. "You think I'll let you keep this house?" The house was my dad's legacy. It was the only thing that tied me to him, and I had no intention of letting it go. But my mom's rage only made things more complicated. As the days passed, I started to wonder if she ever really wanted to reconcile, or if she was just trying to take advantage of the situation. And that's when I overheard her talking to her husband about it. She said she was only trying to get her hands on the money, not because she cared about me, but because she wanted to secure her future. Hearing those words broke something inside me. It confirmed everything I had always suspected, that my mom's interest in me was only superficial and transactional. I cut off all contact with her after that.